So today I'm going to be talking about React. Now, overall, I do not like React. I think React has been it's like an STD for me. It chafes when I use it. It's like sand for Anakin. It gets everywhere. You can't really have a good time in it if you know what I'm saying, right? Because it's going to get in all the cracks and all the crevices. And you can't get rid of it once it's there. So I'm going to kind of try and do the same thing I've done the last two streams. I'm going to go over the fundamental argument of what React is overall. I'm going to go into the arguments that kind of start off with like a bit less of the data, and then we're going to jump into the data, and we're just going to tie it off at the end. So I don't really like reviewing articles like this. I find it to be like, I don't know, it's low tier when tech streamers pull up articles and content and then they just talk over it and repeat it, or they pull up other videos and whatnot. But I am trying to do this with a more like scientific approach. So I'm excusing myself, all right? I'm giving myself a pass. I get a hall pass to do this. Okay, deal with it, all right? It's just how it is. Okay, so the first article I'm going to go over is this one. It kind of touches on frameworks in general, which is, I think, a good entry point into some of the more fundamental arguments about why I think frameworks are essentially, they create more problems than they cause. So the author of the article wrote this in 2022. I mean, it's only 2 years ago, by Jerome Bow. And he starts off naming some of the more popular frameworks like React, Ember, Backbone, Knockout, Svelte, Fresh, Next. I mean, I'm sure a lot of us have at least heard of these frameworks. And then he calls out the correct mindset of a lot of programmers, which is, well, what the heck am I supposed to learn and use? And then he brings out some good stuff. For example, pretending to help. Comparison articles are published or updated just as often as these libraries are. However, most of them are usually biased, as I worked with this one versus I tried others a bit. Less biased authors will conclude that it depends on performance, tooling, support, community, which is just another way of being inconclusive. This touches on to the point that I kind of started out with. These arguments do tend to reduce to, but how do I feel about this though? Even benchmarks, by comparing the same application on every framework, can hardly provide a realistic comparison, as limited by the scope of dummy app, such as to-do list. Now, I do think I have some data that kind of breaks this barrier, but generally speaking, I do think benchmarks lean too much on the basic to-do list scope, right? And so I get the argument here. In the end, frameworks look like religion or politics. Each of them pretend to have the solution, but each of them is different. It's just wannabe Doctor Stranges trying to conjure up ways to spit divs on a screen. Each of them claim to provide the best vision of an app or of the world, but there are heated debates about which one holds the truth. Each of them requires you to follow specific rules, and while there may be similarities, it is always hard to convert from one to another. So this is kind of, I've made this case before. If you saw my interview on Backend Banter, I kind of likened these frameworks, which you could say languages or libraries also fall into this. I've been guilty of doing this as well. It's really difficult to escape, but they're a lot like cults. What cults like to do is they like to use your emotions to override your logic. And one of the ways that they do that is they provide you with a checklist. If you just trust what we tell you, because we are, I am, say, one or a small group of people are God's chosen spokespeople on earth, God tells us that we need to tell you that you have to follow these checkboxes. And if you do, God approves of you. And when you die or whatever, you get, these amazing rewards. So just follow the checklist and your life will work out. And it's in print, I get it. It's not the same thing. Okay. But so don't take me as like a one-to-one here, but there is a lot of crossover here where the frameworks go, hey, listen, Are you suffering from imposter syndrome? Do you feel like you don't know what to do and how to approach web development and it seems out of reach? Well, don't worry. Someone's done the thinking for you. The programming gods have spoken, and if you follow these framework checklists, then you're going to be just fine, and you're going to make lots of money, and you're going to get hired, and everything's going to be great. And in reality, that's not how it works, almost at all. So let's look at an atheist approach of frameworks. Use none. You could also consider this the grug brain, if you know what that is, which is kind of like what the author of HTMX likes to go with. It's the grug brain approach. Where am I talking from? Aside from 25 plus years of professional experience in software development, this article is based on experience in building a real-world Vanilla.js web app, front and back. All right, let's see. Why not use frameworks? Actually, the idea is not new. As back as 2017, Adrian Holovati, co-creator of the Django web framework, spoke about his own frameworks fatigue and why he left Django to build his own Vanilla.js project. And I can hear the collective voice as if I am, what's his face? Obi-Wan Kenobi in, what was it, episode 3/episode 1, the good ones, where he's like, I feel the collective sound of many people, on a 404ing across the universe in Alderaan. Yeah, that's me right now. I can hear them all going, but you're going to reinvent everything. You're just going to do everything that everyone else does. And it's like, yeah, all right, okay, all right. Not quite. We'll get into it. Let me just take a quick minute. Hey, Les on Twitch. Good to see you. Hope you're doing well. Hey, Son. Hey, Owen on Twitch. How you doing? Hey, Max on X. Good to see you, man. Max says golden age was web tech was introduced, such as Linux, JS, CSS, PHP, and MySQL. We developers, we were referred to as webmasters because we had no teams. A single person ran the entire stack, including UI, UX. It was simplicity over complexity. Max, you nailed it. And that's my entire stream today, for the most part, is going to be going over what I hope is actual data and science to, to prove this out. Hey, Claude, good to see you on Twitch. Oh, no, we went frameworkless. Yeah. All right. So I'm not going to play this. It's fine. If anybody wants to look this up, you can look up the video. But I did play this. I did watch this video on my own. And yes, there is fatigue. Just to be fair, I think it's fair to say that even now there's lots of JS fatigue. So even if you are someone who really, really, really loves React and it's like the only way of life, you might still agree that we're suffering from JavaScript fatigue anyways, right? I don't think that's something that is necessarily that out there. A year later, a frameworkless movement was launched by Francesco Strazzullo, I think. I'm Greek, so I'm going to try and Italianize my Greek a little bit, okay? Francesco Strazzullo, okay? If I'm going to do it the Greek style, I have to roll the R's. Francesco Strazzullo, okay? There you go. Yaya approves. Who ended up publishing a book entitled Frameworkless Front-End Development. One may wonder, why would someone want to dive into such a supposedly hard task of building a web app without a framework? Why not build on top of previous work using robust frameworks with hundreds of years of combined engineering hours, which is again the same principled argument as, why would I want to go figure out religion by myself when I can have someone tell me what I should be doing in my religion, or have someone who's already figured out all the complicated stuff about what it means to be involved in a religion of any kind, regardless of which god or gods you believe in. It's the same thing. Is it a NIH syndrome that will eventually lead to building a custom framework? It's a not invented here syndrome, which is anyways, that's a whole other thing. No, that's not the reason. Developers are not more inclined to masochism than the general population. Unless you talk to this guy, I'm literally building a game in WebAssembly. Or you talk to Soden. That guy recently did assembly for the web. He basically did WebAssembly for the web just because he could. We enjoy the pain. Actually, they're probably more lazy than anyone. They want to write less code so they get less bugs. They want to automate processes to avoid human mistakes. This is real. How many times have you thought about, say, two people working on the same feature and one person creates something, several lines of code that are new. Another person does not catch the problem. And then you go, well, how are we going to fix it? We're going to write tests as an example, right? And so you automate the problem away. And then the meme, laziness, the most prominent characteristic of a developer. Depending on who you are, maybe you do want your developers to be lazy. You might think that's a virtue. But they also want to be agile. That is, to be able to handle any problem easily and so quickly. While quick sounds akin to one promise frameworks make to save you time by doing plumbing for you while increasing reliability, this doesn't come for free. They want you to sign a contract to agree with a tax, and they want to put your code into a silo. The framework tax. Merca. Framework services come with a cost. They require you to comply with their API so that they can provide you their services. This is just the way frameworks work. Your code needs to adhere to some rules, including more or less boilerplate code. So it's the framework way or the highway. Your daily challenges will be less about how to do this than how to make the framework not do this. Try to dodge those constraints and you're at risk. Bypassing a framework by directly calling low-level APIs means that you cannot expect to be understood, and so you cannot expect the framework to be consistent with it. So it's a false promise frameworks make that you'll be focusing on your business. In reality, you'll have to care on the framework too, and a lot. Sometimes you will spend more time handling a framework-specific problem than a business problem. And I think this is a fundamentally under-tracked statistic. If you were to try and find statistics on how much time you spend on specific types of problems, I don't think there is a lot of data out there to prove that this is the case. I do think that there is some data though, and I'll try and get into it. Upgrades are effectively forced if you want a new feature, even if you didn't want all of those or the next release, you need to upgrade the whole thing, or you want a bug fix. Not always 100% true on these points, but somewhat true. Or you want to avoid loosing support. I think there's one O in there. If it's getting a little degen here. You want to loose the support. Okay, these things have feelings. They're human beings. Okay, they're not like my blow-up dolls. As new versions are shipped, the one on which you have based your app will get deprecated. Upgrades can also be lacking and leave you frustrated and possibly with a project at risk with an identified bug but no planned date for a fix. That's happened a lot. Third-party framework-specific libraries such as widgets or plugins are no exception to that rule and will be less and less compatible with your app if you keep using old versions. Maintaining backward compatibility has become such a hassle for framework authors that they now find it more profitable to work on tools that automate upgrades of your code as much as possible, like Angular's NG update, React Native Upgrade Helper, Facebook's JS Code Shift, etc. Because they know that without such automation, you would have dumped them already. There's the legacy API, for example. React previously shipped with an experimental context API. The old API will be supported in all 16.x releases, but applications using it should migrate to the new version. The legacy API will be removed in a future major React version. Read the legacy context docs here. And you know what happens? You get the Marvel effect, where the original Avengers kicked ass, but whoever the new Avengers are going to be, it's not going to be the same, is it? And we all know it, and nobody's willing to say it. Train to learn about their magic, what they can and cannot do, what their concepts are, their APIs, ecosystems, tools, but never how they do it, including about changes that may occur in upcoming versions. Should you pick the most popular framework of the day, this might be easier, but it's unlikely that you'll ever know about every aspect of a given framework. Hype comes and goes. That happened with Angular v2, for example. Should you decide to use another framework or a new app, your investment in the proprietary knowledge will be lost, because it's mostly about proprietary magic, not patterns you could reuse elsewhere. This, I think, is a really good point. When was the last time you worked in a framework, library, or language, and you had more fundamental principles carry over with you, as opposed to the things that you learned that were specific to the thing you were using? This explains a lot of inertia in enterprise projects. Even if each project is different than the previous one, compatibility means deliberately repeating other people's mistakes, said the late David Wheeler. Compromise with the drawbacks implied by delegating control. You may not be able to do whatever you want or to prevent the framework from doing things you do not want, or you may not achieve the performance you want because of an additional layering, too generic code, bigger code size, or backwards compatibility requirements. Loose skills. A number of developers either don't know much about the lower level APIs because they always use the framework layer instead, or live in the past, i.e. stuck on an outdated knowledge of it, not being aware of the latest improvements and new capabilities. The law of the instrument then leads too often to build overkill solutions to simple problems, and loose, if even once acquired knowledge, to build simpler ones. Or instead of focusing on having people go and like learn about new underlying low level principles, they have to go out and learn about something that's the principle of the framework itself, not something that they that helps translate into what's going on under the hood. Being guided by blueprints and recipes, they lose or not gain a culture of good software design and barely build a significant engineering experience. Just like users of CSS frameworks like Bootstrap and Tailwind lack CSS skills, users of web frameworks are doomed to lack experience in both modern web APIs and software design in general. Okay. Max on X, he says, Spot frameworks were built in the name of speed. We now have fast machine and network, so why do we need these frameworks? jQuery is no longer needed as we now have browser compatibility and consistency. What we lost was real RESTful APIs. Now we have endpoint APIs returning JSON fake REST. Yes, Max, you're right. We tried to solve problems that may have been problems at the time to some degree, but could have been solved at that time. And they could have been solved faster if we had focused more on pushing those problems to be solved, rather than adding complexity in order to try and obscure the problem away. We kind of like prolonged the problems and then added complexity over top of we slapped lipstick on a pig. We put AI faces on top of blow up dolls and told people to go have fun with them. It's as good as the real thing. It's not. It's nowhere near as warm. And if it is, what the hell are you doing with that blow up doll? Doesn't all of this apply to any programming language in general? I would argue that it applies to many 6-string, but I don't think it's all. So there are many languages that focus more on the low level stuff. They don't hold your hand. They don't try and obscure by giving you kind of like an easier pattern that makes you feel better about using it. You could say like assembly doesn't do that. For example, like I'm not saying we should all go back to assembly, but as an example, if you were going to use assembly, you're going to have one heck of a time. It's not there to make you feel good about the way you're programming. It's there to communicate with the machine. It acts as a communication layer between you and whatever the instructions are to the machine. And it does not do so by pretending that it's pretty, that you're taking, the prettiest girl out to the ball. Like that's not what it's there for. There are other languages that do the same thing, like C. It has some niceties over top of, say, assembly, sure. But again, it's not there to make you feel good, right? That's not the point. So there's a specific delineation that I'm trying to kind of like break out here, 6-string. Yeah, bedtime. Yeah, that's right, Del. The framework silo. So in this particular portion, the author talks about, aside the tax you have to pay to get the benefits, frameworks can also induce an additional major issue when they are not standard. So they enforce proprietary mechanisms like the inability to port your code. Sometimes, not all the time. I don't think this is true in every case, but it's definitely true in some cases. Interoperability with other frameworks. I have firsthand seen this happen where, for example, somebody decides that they're going to build some actually useful, incredibly powerful widget in React. And then they have a really big customer who wants to throw a lot of money at this widget because they think it's amazing and they want to bring it into their website. And some React developer sells it as, oh, it's just a React widget. You can drop it into your website. No problem. And then the person who's forking over the money has a different framework that they're running on their website. They could be running like WordPress with, I don't know, some Vue front end, and then good luck trying to drop your React widget into it. You'd think it works, but it doesn't work more often than it does. It is a huge mess. Of course, you can get reassured by selecting the most popular framework at the time of your project starts. That may be acceptable for an app that is short-lived but not for long-term investment. I'll just let you soak in this chart. I'll just let you soak that in. This is what happens. I remember when Preact came out, by the way. Man, that went through a hype. Right? So you're the timing of when you're going to choose to jump into the latest framework definitely matters. And yeah, Ubinatus on Twitch, no self-host. Yeah. Hey, Laugh, good to see you. Hope you're doing well. Standard frameworks, however, don't imply this silo effect. On the web, using standard web APIs makes your investment less risky, as they're expected to work on most browsers, if not all, or not all the ones you target. Support can still be provided through polyfills. For instance, web components are today both portable, that can be used in nearly all browsers, and interoperable. It can be used by any code, including proprietary frameworks, as they are encapsulated as any HTML element. Even better for performance, their runtime, custom elements, shadow DOM, HTML templates, is executed as part of the browser, so it's already there. It's not downloaded, it's native. Rare image of developers trying to escape a framework silo. Before the nuke launches and takes them all with it. So are frameworks bad by nature? My answer would be yes. But the author says no. If only because coding an app almost always results in creating your own framework. Any app implements its own business rules to be enforced on its own business components. So frameworks are a good thing if either they are standard or end up with a standard. For instance, the web platform is a standard framework, and web component frameworks end up building components that comply with the standard. Are product specific, so you have no choice but to comply with it if you want to ship a product related component. So like a Chrome extension or an OS specific app. They're used to build non-critical apps, so something short-lived or an MVP. And they're app specific. They make sense and are useful only in the context of a specific app. So now, granted, even though I disagree that frameworks are bad by nature, he does make some reasonably good arguments here, which is if you are going to use a framework, then these are some pretty good guidelines on when a framework would be good. Because what you're essentially doing is accepting some level of non-attachment. And if you can accept some level of non-attachment, you can accept it in the framework that you're about to use. I kind of like that. So in a nutshell, avoiding general purpose frameworks to build an app aims to maximize flexibility, minimize dependency, and maximize performance. The alternative. So what is it to build apps without framework, tax, and silo? We must clarify the anti-goal. Building an app without a framework is not to be confused with replacing the framework. This is not the challenge at stake. A framework is a general purpose technical solution to host virtually any app, so it is less about your app than all apps. On the opposite, going vanilla is an opportunity to focus on your app's needs only. So you do not necessarily need to reinvent all the wheels or a vast majority of the wheels. In some cases, you don't need to reinvent any wheel just because you're going vanilla. So you have to ensure that you scope narrowly enough. It's not as hard as building a framework because you don't aim to build a proprietary component model with its own life cycle, proprietary plugin and extension system, a fancy template syntax like JSX, optimizations that make sense for general purpose like change detection or virtual DOM, and framework specific tools. So it's not a reinvent the wheel task. It's focus on your app's goals. So you can essentially just assume that there's nothing that you actually need to do, that a vast majority of what needs to be done is specific to your goals for what you're trying to build, which is a very different way of looking at, I'm going to not use a framework or language or library, whatever it is. So then he goes on to talk about changing your mindset about this approach, and there's some good links here. There is a quote that I kind of like. For instance, the authors of Meat Space, that's a old school reference, I guess, didn't need much more than the standard APIs. Jack Franklin, a Google engineer working on Chrome dev tools, Puppeteer, and other tools, also emphasized a small set of recommendations and shared his feedback on going vanilla. After working with React for over 5 years, I was nervous about moving on and not having its power and features available to me. It's ended up being a pleasant experience. Yes, it's amazing what shedding Stockholm Syndrome can do for you. As we've seen above, standard APIs are among the good frameworks as they allow portability, interoperability, they are long-lived, they're immediately available. One could also consider that the choice of the programming language should focus on standards. JavaScript has evolved over the years and now contains features usually provided by other languages like the class keyword or limited type checking support through JS.comments such as type. I would have to agree. As much as JavaScript just sucks, it just sucks. And it's mostly because of V8. Even though it still sucks, it's made enough improvements that the reasons why you'd go to a different framework or why you would choose a framework in the past are becoming either non-existent reasons now, or they are going to become very non-existent quickly. So then he talks about other languages. And then the difference between libraries and frameworks. So a library is he kind of breaks down the difference between choosing, like comparing one to the other. There's nothing wrong with using libraries as code that you cannot write by yourself because you don't have the time to do it, or because this requires too much expertise. All you have to care about is modularity, avoiding redundancy, and avoid locking. Now, I agree that there are cases where using a bunch of libraries or even just one you can excuse it away, but what you're also doing is you're opening the door to a world of other libraries or stuff you don't know. And it's just like, well, come on in. I have no idea who you are or what code you're running or how. But because you are telling me that you're solving a problem, and then because I attempt to recreate the problem, and it used to exist, but now it doesn't because I have you as the library, so it doesn't exist, so therefore you solve my problem, I'm cool with this. I think it actually opens the door to a lot more problems than it solves. And not understanding why you have a library and what other dependencies come with that library, it should be a huge red flag. If people actually took the time to investigate the code that they're importing in, I think this would be much less of a problem, and I'd be more okay with people just using libraries in general. Then there are patterns, which this is kind of like his breakdown of different ways to approach writing your own like framework or library, say in vanilla JS. And so you could do so he brings out things like templates, which I have been playing around with. There is something that I don't think a lot of people recognize, that there's a lot of power in templates and slots. I have a crazy product that I'm going to be creating and selling, that it's like, it's so simple. I don't know how nobody has thought of it, but the beauty of it is that it's built into browsers. There's like nothing required, no extra stuff required. And the code for it is really simple. You have template literals, you have tagged template literal functions, you have events, you have DOM management, you even have custom events with observer patterns. You have components with web components, which are extremely powerful, by the way. And again, you don't need anything else. They're all there. And like the article mentioned earlier, web components can just essentially just plug into like React, Vue, Svelte, whatever it is, Lit, whatever it is, just bring it in. You have routing. You have a history API. You also have server-side routing. We've had it since the dawn of time. It's called URLs. You have states in your HTML. You have states in your URLs. You can create complicated URL strings that look ugly, but they still maintain state. You can have post requests that still have state. There are a variety of ways to maintain states and routing beyond just your use React, bro. We have lots of updates on lazy loading, including for images, even like WebP, progressive loading. We have importing modules now. It's just a browser standardized API. Native apps, you don't really need to do anything too crazy anymore. The gap is shrinking. I don't like any of the things that are any of the words in here. All these words are trigger words for me, but there are the gap between whether you can create one native app for multiple platforms is shrinking. Server-side rendering is getting much, much better for a number of different reasons, including improvements on the browser and on the front end. Interactivity is... We've had interactivity capabilities for such a long time. They've only improved. You can take a look at HTMX mentioned, where it takes like old school interactivity paradigms and it essentially like gives them a superpower. It just like enhances them greatly. So the idea that you can't have good interactivity these days is also, it's becoming pretty much a moot point. You can do awesome things. Internationalization has become definitely much easier than it was in the past. Your tooling for, if you like doing things like Webpack, Parcel, ESBuild, or Vite, yep, for sure. But you actually don't even really need to use them. The stuff that comes built into a lot of simple systems nowadays, there's no longer, I think, a need to use things like Sass or bundling or things like that. You just need to have someone who's good at their individual, like, the world that they inhabit, and that you hire them or work with them to tackle. And as long as they're good and they have some decent level of understanding and knowledge about that world, then you actually need less tools, not more tools. And then some of the challenges to doing these things are, of course, like, well, let's go over just a few of them, right? So the biggest difficulty in not using these tools, frameworks, libraries, etc., isn't really technical. It's about people. That's the argument that the author makes here, which this is why I brought this up as the first article, because it kind of ties into what I described in the beginning. Yeah, but my preferences though, my feelings though, how do I feel about doing this though? It doesn't feel right, etc., etc. So the author says you have to accept that you need to step out of your comfort zone. Hopefully you'll see going vanilla is not so hard, and the framework stuff that you used to leverage is more overcomplex than magic. Also, you'll probably discover new APIs like web components, ES6 modules, proxies, which are really cool, mutation observers, and that the web is more modern and powerful than you thought. And then, of course, you're going to have to convince others, which is what I'm trying to do. And people are reluctant to change. And so then people will tell you the following. Let me add one first. What do you want us to do, bro? Go back to writing assembly? No, that's not my argument. And you know what? Even if it was my argument, tell me how that's wrong. Why would it be bad, aside from you have to do things harder in order to get better performance, better results out of it? You're going to write your own framework. No, you're going to write an app instead of a framework. You're going to write more code. Maybe not so much, as this has to be compared with the boilerplate code required by frameworks. So it's a matter of code you import versus code you actually write, fingers on key. You're going to reinvent the wheel constantly. Of course not. Now using a framework is just choosing not to comply with its predefined rules, but it's not forgetting dry principles, and as stated above, you can still and should use battle-tested third-party libraries as long as it makes sense. You'll write more code for every feature. No, you'll just use your own rule instead of the framework boilerplate. There will be no documentation. No documentation about the framework for sure, since there isn't any. But as for any software development, you are still expected to document your app. Notably, the use of patterns will help to auto-document your software design. Your app's code documentation is the one you care about. Having an additional frameworks documentation is just the consequence of having an additional framework. There will be no constraints or patterns to guide the developer. No, nothing prevents you to enforce constraints if you need it. You just have to define contracts. The difference is that they will be the constraints of your choice tailored for your app. You will miss performance improvements, such as the once hyped virtual DOM, which is today challenged, link in article, including by subsequent frameworks like Svelte or Aurelia. This is a Svelte blog post, why virtual DOM is pure overhead. It's like it yeah, anyways. No, as those performance improvements are actually more needed by the general purpose nature of frameworks, not by custom apps. On the opposite, general purpose frameworks will more likely miss a number of performance improvements that custom code can implement. Whoops, not what I meant to click. You get this problem because you didn't use a framework. Every difficulty, bug, delay, recruitment, etc. will be blamed on that unorthodox choice, like it was for me for HTMX. Because most developers' experience is that everything that has worked was using a framework. Not using them will be assumed risky by default. This assumption will be considered as confirmed as soon as a problem arises, whether it is related to not using a framework or not. Aha! Everything burned. It is because you used this framework, or you decided not to use a framework, and so suffer, fool. They will forget all the similar issues they had when using the framework. We can't find developers. You'll be told that it's difficult to find developers who can develop vanilla code. That's both true and false. True, because a lot of developers, not speaking about managers, will find themselves more comfortable using known recipes such as frameworks. It's like, who are you going to hire to be part of your kitchen staff? Are you going to hire a chef who can pump out, dishes because they're going through memorized recipes? Or are you going to hire a chef that can take basically the principles of cooking and can pretty much whip up anything you can dream of quite creatively any night? Candidates might feel a bit scared about building a web app from scratch if they never did it once, or if they don't know the basic web APIs well. This is really what it comes down to. It's essentially, I've had my hand held so nicely for so long, I don't really know what's going on in the browser, and I don't want to. It's scary. I am so scared by it. I don't want to go look at my real tiny browser and go look and see what's going on. I'm scared. Can you hold me, Mommy React? I just want to suck on the teeth of React. That's what this is. False, because if you want to build quality apps, you should not look for this kind of developer. For sure, it is currently easier to find any React developer, but what you need is not a React developer, but a good developer. You won't get the code quality of frameworks. For sure, frameworks or libraries that are usually written by major industry players or experienced developers probably have better code quality. However, as we saw above, the code of frameworks is mostly related to framework-specific activities, not your app. Furthermore, you can still make bad design choices and write poor code using frameworks. So if you're going to do it, why not just build your own and at least have the flexibility to fix it within the confines of your own stupidity, rather than the grouped stupidity of many people who think that they can, come up with something better together. The quality of your application always depends more on the quality of your team than the lack of blueprints. Let me just take a pause here because I see chat. No package managers. Yeah, I agree. I don't want package managers. I not by default anyways. Can I turn on dark mode? Yeah, I think I can. Sorry, I should have thought of that. Where is dark mode? Is dark mode not on? Is there no dark mode? Where's dark mode, folks? Imagine not using Dark Reader. Imagine being me. Yeah. Okay, we're almost done with this article, so I guess is it Alt Shift D? I'll try it. Nah. No, it's not doing it. There's no dark mode, folks. Hey Gen X, good to see you. How are you doing? Totally agree. I write hybrid or PWA apps using TypeScript and solid design principles. React allows me a pretty clean way to do component-based development on top of that. Well, there you go. I think that's actually a good argument for why understanding the principles underneath matters more than the framework you're using, and you have to be more careful about, like, that's kind of like my whole argument, is being more careful about the framework you're choosing. Okay, let's just finish this article then, because I guess it's blinding people's faces. You won't get the same performance as frameworks. No, we'll get better performance. I'm not 100% convinced of this. I will say that you can, if you're trying to be more careful about your code, you can definitely do it. And you can also import bad performance based on the framework you're bringing in. Okay, but let's just read the argument here. The marketed argument that framework includes sophisticated technologies that can improve performance, such as the virtual DOM, which allowed bufferization of DOM changes in order to limit their changes on it, is off topic, as it relates to solving the performance drawbacks of a general purpose solution. When the developer updates the DOM by him or herself, she or he can get the best performance because they will now know if it's worth bufferizing caching it or if it's pure overhead. So this I can kind of agree with. You do have the flexibility to determine that if React is doing, if whatever you're writing in vanilla is not doing what you want it to be doing in terms of performance, then you have the option to move up, right? So if you start at a kind of like a higher level up here and you build as much as you can tailored to the goal of your application, then you can go, well, what problem am I facing? Is there anything out there that can do this, that can solve this problem better than I can? Then that's one of the reasons why I don't wholesale say just stop using React, even though I like saying that because it's funny. There are cases where frameworks like React or Angular or Preact even, or like late HTML, I think it's the third one. They have their uses. Like there are instances where it's like, okay, yeah, I get it. I get why you'd use it. My argument, and probably the argument of this author, I think they would generally agree with me, is that it's just used too much and reached to as the default way to go way too often. And it's introduced more problems than it solved. And so I don't know where this chart comes from. It's probably this one from Line Engineering. Let's see. It's 2022, but still. Okay, yeah. So they're probably getting it from CPU performance scores, which I've seen. Yeah, I've seen this before. I'm pretty sure I've seen this page before. And so there it is. Right now it's 2022. So these numbers might have changed, but I do have some updated numbers, which I will get into soon, so we can get out of white mode here. And so then he summarizes the article essentially. There was this article that I just read was put on Hacker News, and there was a comment here which I will read. I don't normally do this, but I thought this comment was really good, so I'm going to read the comment essentially because I thought it was, I don't know, I just thought it was really good. The biggest crimes of web frameworks is they take you away into abstraction land, away from the actual standards, and they complexify simplicity. All of that under the guise of being more standard and more simple. It's one of the greatest lies ever sold. I remember how .NET Web Forms .NET mentioned, and lots of Java boilerplate frameworks did that early on, or browsers breaking standards. They wanted developer lock-in just like web frameworks of today. They wanted to keep developers dumb by being simple as long as you stay in their walled garden where they handle the standards. No thanks. I've been developing JavaScript for decades, and I actually like the original, less Java-like boilerplate of the previous iterations, and you can still do that. The people that push frameworks aren't always trying to make things more simple. They want control, lock-in, and domain ownership. This, I think, actually holds true more than it doesn't, but not everyone has that goal in mind when they're trying to push you into a framework. However, what I will say is that there are probably a lot of people who don't realize that this is what they're actually advocating for, but they have good intentions behind doing it. That I could agree with a lot more. The last tool to really simplify in JavaScript was jQuery, and most of that is browser level now, including selection, the killer feature of jQuery across all those all-document layer days of pain. Those days are over. Simplicity is being complexified now. Tools like jQuery and even Flash or other plugins were platform pushers that got the web to the place we have now, which is better than ever for web standards, yet we have all these bloated frameworks on top now. In a way, it is a bit like the XKCD comic with so many standards. Just to not do JavaScript, people built thousands of frameworks on top to simplify the standards that are simple now. While web frameworks may have been needed for a time, and in certain team-based scenarios, they are a crutch, a maintenance problem long-term. They take actual standards out of experience, and the worst is they make the simple complex. Web frameworks have become the DLL hell or dependency deep end. They used to be They used to be used to attack other platforms. .NET and Java have less bloat now and are moving more standard, while JavaScript web frameworks only pretend to. The web standards of today are amazing and take away the need for frameworks today. From templating to HTML templates, vanilla JS with classes and async, and better API access like Fetch, and browser support for VDOM with Shadow DOM, components with web components, CSS now with lots of additions like variables, transitions, animations, flex, grid, media queries, Canvas, SVG for interactivity. There is little need to use frameworks except to sell books and conferences and keep developers locked in. As developers, engineers, the job is taking complexity and simplifying. Ask yourself if your framework abstraction is doing that above actual standards that is a pain long-term to maintain. This is a bit of a loaded set of, sentences. It's a loaded language, but I do generally agree with it. Web frameworks were supposed to work together. They are now behemoth monoliths that limit dynamic and fluid systems that scripting is supposed to bring. People went out and made a scripting language for glue into Java boilerplate. In areas like targeting a certain JavaScript ECMA version or polyfills, those are still worthy. The other pile of verbose bloat abstraction that is there is just that, a pile of verb bloat. Verb bloat is a new word to define frameworks of today sold in as small helpers to replace jQuery that have grown to the size of dev lock-in tar pits. No developer in their right mind would use this for products or projects that control unless they have to at this point. Verb bloat. So then he goes on to provide links to different APIs on the web that make web development way better than it used to be. Okay, now